Hi there, my name is Sean Murray from The Journal. For the past 4 weeks, we've been delving into the future of work and the working week as part of the Good Information Project. We know that things have changed so much for so many of us in the past year as the pandemic came in and upended all of our lives. We know from CSO stats that around half of us in Ireland have had our work situation changed by COVID-19. And within that, there's hundreds of thousands of people who now work from home and they have done for over 400 days. I'm one of them. I'm coming to you live from my garden shed in Dublin. This massive turn to remote working, it does beg the question: what will our working lives look like after the pandemic is hopefully behind us? And here with me to tease out some of these issues today is Helen Petersen. Anne is an American writer and journalist based in Montana. She worked as a senior culture writer for BuzzFeed until 2020, when she began writing a newsletter for subscribers at Substack. Anne has also published 3 books, the most recent of which is Can't Even: How Millennials Became the Burnout Generation. Thanks so much for joining us, Anne. How are you?
I'm great. So nice to be here today.
And I suppose, thinking of the name of that book, that could be a good place to start. You've been writing about burnout and those kind of issues that are facing us in that kind of sense since before we even knew what COVID-19 was. Could you tell me a little bit about what was it that brought you to write about this topic, and how do you think that working from home during the pandemic has maybe exacerbated that sense of burnout that many of us are feeling?
Yeah, I mean the short answer is that I burned out and I didn't know how to describe it, and so my tendency as a journalist and as a former academic is always to try to analyze things that I'm observing and also experiencing, and so I started trying to figure out, why I couldn't do the dumb errands on my list, right? Like I couldn't bring my shoes to the cobbler. I couldn't do just like things that were always on my list that kept like recycling every week. As I started reading more and more about that, I realized, oh yes, this is clearly a sign of burnout. And I had just misunderstood burnout previously as something that only happened to like healthcare workers and, foreign correspondents in war zones, that sort of thing. But I think burnout just has a lot to do with our current rhythms of work and our expectations. And with millennials in particular, there is an increased and intersecting forms of precarity that make us feel like we have to work all the time. And there were certainly forms of precarity and instability for previous generations. But I think that a lot of the different economic forces and the feelings too of the financial crisis kind of collide on the millennial generation to create this feeling like everything could explode at any moment. And I will also add, since this is for an Irish audience, that when I first wrote about burnout back in 2019, the article was translated into a lot of different languages and it went all over the world. And some places that are operating within, an American style version of capitalism, I would hear a lot from people in India, some people in China. But a place where I heard from a ton of people that was a little bit unexpected to me is from Dublin. And when I first started getting responses, and it was only Dublin, right? Not any other places in Ireland. And when I first started seeing a pattern there, I wrote back to a couple people and was like, why, what is it that is making this resonate for millennials who are in Dublin? And they said that it's, the the presence of the tech industry and how it has changed a lot of the qualities of work. Even if you don't necessarily work within the tech industry, it has changed the atmosphere of work in Dublin in particular. So that that's always something that I find compelling and like to talk about more.
Yeah, because I think that's a really interesting point you make, because I think Dublin was very much becoming a city where with lots of young millennials where we would all get up and go to work and we'd socialize afterwards, and it was this sense of work was becoming kind of all enveloping, and that's really kind of been driven home from the pandemic, because there's been so many of us who are working from home. And I know myself, at various stages I found it tough, I found it hard, and things have gotten a bit much. Do you think the people who maybe don't enjoy remote working now, it won't always be like that? Is that fair to say? It won't always feel like it does now. Could these kind of people, maybe even like myself, could we get a new lease of life after COVID in terms of how we work?
Yeah, and I want to backtrack just a second because I didn't answer completely your first question, which was like, how did the pandemic exacerbate our burnout? And the answer to that is that so much of burnout is this feeling of work enveloping the totality of your life and also not having any sort of chance to actually have authentic leisure, right? And authentic rest, the sort of rejuvenation that allows us to return to work and feel refreshed. Instead, it's just constant, right? Just like constant work, constant worry, constant anxiety. And if you think about that as a primary cause of burnout, that just gets worse during the pandemic, right? Sometimes I like to think of it as, when you're working from home over the past year, that you're living like one constant Wednesday. Like there is no Saturday. That's not any different. There's not much else to do, especially during the wintertime. So I guess you might as well work, right? And there's no even, going to and from the office, having that delineation of work time, non-work time, even if you came home and like responded to emails and that sort of thing, there's just no transition or buffer zone to mark those differences. And so I think that's what a lot of what we struggled with. Now, to your question of, can working from home be different once we emerge from the pandemic? Absolutely. All of the thing that my partner, Charlie Warzel, and I, who is co-writing the book with me about working from home, the thing that we like to focus on is like, you're not working from home right now. You're working from home during a pandemic under duress, right? You're working from home in like the most lonely of situations. You're working from home, unless you're working from home with a partner, you're working from home alone. And if your partner is in the home with you, you're kind of working on top of each other, overlapping spaces, not having a lot of privacy. Here in America, a lot of people's kids are home with them in some capacity. It's not working from home. In the future, kids will be in childcare, first of all, so that will change a lot of people's ways of working. But also, there'll be so many different configurations that you can work with other people. You can work with your friends, go over to each other's houses, even if you are in very different industries. You can still be at the same table with one another and have that sort of the immediacy of people, the comfort of people, the ability to chat every hour if you want to, right? Or to stop for lunch. You can go to co-working spaces. You can go to cafes. Like all of these real freedoms of and mobility of working from home are available to people. They're just not available right now because there is a disease that is still ravaging many countries across the world. So I think that we have to hold that vision in front of us to remember that the way things are now is not the way things have to be in the future.
One of the arguments that I've heard from sectors who are kind of really keen to get back to the office, they really want to get back to the office, they say things like, well, you can't replicate the kind of idea generation that you get from two people sitting across from each other or a group of people in a room. You can't replicate the kind of social aspect, the kind of social activity you might engage in work. Those things can't be replicated over Zoom, say, because we all have Zoom fatigue apparently. Like, what's your reaction to that? Do you think that those things that we can't get in for when we're working from home, do you think that we can get them in different ways, or how do we overcome those kind of challenges?
Well, this is where I think it's important to point to the fact that like most companies, the vast majority of companies, are not going to be fully distributed moving forward. And fully distributed is a like tech word for like everyone is all over the world. There's one meeting every year where everyone comes together, like remote forever. Most companies are going to move towards a hybrid scenario where, depending on the company, you come in once a month, twice a week, three times a week, right? It's more talking about how can we make work flexible to people's needs in a way that allows for collaborative time, right? For those in-person interactions when you need them. Because, someone told me the other day, they're like, I don't need to come into the office on the days when I'm just emailing, right? On the days when I'm just doing data collection. Like, there is no need for me to come into an office space other than sucking 2 hours out of my day. And so I think that smart companies are trying to figure out policies moving forward that allow for that flexibility, that really pinpoint the moments of the office day or the moments of the office week or month that really require those collaborative moments, those in-person interactions, and being unprecious about the rest of the workday. It doesn't require in-person presence. It just doesn't.
Do you think that for a lot of people who have been remote working during this, it's created a kind of expectation that this should be the way forward? Like I can imagine any kind of worker who has been working to a really high standard while working from home, and their employer asks them to come back when hopefully the pandemic is all behind us. They can just say, "Well, I've been working from home, everything is fine. Why do I have to go back?" Do you think that like companies who don't offer that option, they'll be left behind, and they need to kind of integrate those ideas like now, even though like in Ireland, say we're not permitted to return to the office yet, but do you think they
Yeah.
should be doing that work now?
Yeah, you're seeing this already in the United States. I think that some offices are saying, okay, come back, right? And we are not out of the woods yet when it comes to the pandemic. There are all sorts of reasons why people cannot or don't want to go back into full-time office scenarios. And I think the labor market right now is such that like people have cushions, a little bit of cushions, people who are of a certain who have been working throughout the pandemic, like there is somewhat of an ability to be a little bit choosier. So if your company is saying, no, we don't want this for the future, you can say, well, I don't want to be working for this company, right? And I think that a lot of companies are just desperate to return to the way things were without interrogating some of the problems about the way things were. And also, some companies are like, well, we can just keep doing this remote strategy the way that we were doing it before. But that's not correct either, right? There are a lot of problems that have arisen with the current remote work strategies. And I think a lot of workers as well need to work with their employers to figure out guardrails to protect them from simply working all the time, because that's what's easiest oftentimes when you're working from home.
In terms of just on that point, thing of always being on. Like, what's the best way to combat that? Like, have you found in the people you've spoken to, what's the best way to be like, no, I'm going to shut down my laptop. I'm going to go into the other room. I'm going to switch off in whatever way I can. What do you find are the best ways to maybe try do that?
Well, this is something that is hard for many millennials, especially people who have been in office jobs and have really conceived of themselves as trying to be work robots, the best work robot they could possibly be. But the best thing to make yourself not work all the time, one, legitimate hobbies, like actual activities that you like to do that aren't work. And sometimes when you have devoted a lot of your life to working, those hobbies, whatever interests you had maybe when you were younger or when in your early 20s, those have atrophied. So trying to develop parts of your personality that aren't just your ability to work, like that is an important thing. And then the other thing too is being around other people, right? Just like, and that's a hard thing during the pandemic, but actually being present with each other in non-work scenarios, like not just hanging out with work friends, but also cultivating communities and ways of being together that don't have anything to do with work. Like that's a really important way to do that. The other thing too is I think making schedules. So like in my schedule, sometimes people will be like, oh, I want to like, can you do this at this time or whatever? And I'll be like, no, I'm busy. And oftentimes I'm busy doing nothing, right? Or I'm busy gardening, or I'm busy with this other thing that I have allocated time for. But I have scheduled that so that there's no way that work can intrude on it, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
One thing that I think is interesting, I think you've written about it before as well, is about how like when we're going into like maybe what work will be like in the future, we don't fall into a situation where we create like further inequalities in the world of work, because for office workers, we could have this like super flexible, you can work from home some days and be in the office some days kind of situation. But then you have like the in location, like service industry workers, and like sometimes these are mostly like low paid workers. Like, is there
Hmm.
any chance that that like kind of flexibility can trickle down to these workers, or could it go like in the opposite direction and create maybe like a like tiered kind of approach to work?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the reality, right? Is that like there are jobs that have to be in person. There are some jobs that you just cannot do remotely. There are some things like medicine have more flexibility than I think we maybe imagined, right? Like with remote forms of primary care and that sort of thing. But there are still jobs that need to you need to show up every day. And so how can we try to figure out how to make those jobs better too? And honestly, I think, in Ireland you have more protections than we do in the United States. But the thing I try to think a lot about and advocate for and try to plant the seed in the brains of remote workers, office workers, is what does solidarity, worker solidarity, look like? Because if you're just advocating for scenarios that make your life better or people like you and people working in jobs like you're not actually advocating to make society better, right? So I think really actively thinking about what that sort of support looks like is different in every country and different in every political situation, but that needs to be part of the conversation moving forward.
Um, just on that, do you think that COVID has given people in the service industry jobs maybe like a safety net to actually choose the jobs they want? I'm thinking like I know in the US we have a similar kind of system here, but unemployment payments and stimulus checks during the pandemic, like are we laying the foundations to maybe like treat these people better in the future and give them more options? Like, and what to say about the companies reacting as if this is an awful, terrible thing that we're allowing these people to essentially survive and giving them money to keep going?
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting pivot point potentially. I wrote about this a couple weeks ago about how there's this reaction right now in the United States. There's just like articles all over the place that are like, no one wants to work, no companies can hire. And what the unemployment benefits have effectively done is they've given people the ability to say no to jobs that are bad jobs, right? Jobs that don't pay a living wage, jobs in which they will face harassment or, like COVID exposure at low pay, all sorts of components that make a job bad in some capacity. And the question that I think we need to be thinking about is like a lot of our business models are built on paying people non-living wages. And so how can we reconsider our business models and think about like if a business can't pay a living wage, maybe it shouldn't be a business. If a business is essential and can't pay a living wage, like say how childcare is in the United States, like you just cannot, it's just a broken business model, then what is the role of the state and what is the role of taxes in trying to make that business model work? Because I think if if we're just perpetuating poverty through our business models, that it's at the heart of capitalism in a lot of ways, but it doesn't have to be. Like there are different models, different iterations, different ways to regulate capitalism to make that not the case.
Do you think that like a crisis like we're all facing now, does that create the kind of fertile ground to maybe bring about this change, or like are the vested interests will they still like make sure that the status quo is retained? Do you feel like there's more of a groundswell even in the states for those kind of things that you're talking about, or is
I
it too
hope
divided?
so. No, I mean, I am optimistic. I'm always like, this is the time. Like, there's this phrase, a plastic hour. Like, there's a period of time during moments of incredible change where, like, or of transition or of crisis, where change can happen. As you said, it's a fertile ground. The ground has been tilled. So we can either decide to, like, leave it fallow or to like use the same destructive farming practices that suck all the nutrients from the ground, or we can like think of different ways to plant and different ways to nurture and cultivate what we plant in the soil. And so I'm hopeful and I'm hopeful not only in the United States but also just globally. But then I'm also really scared. Like I'm scared a lot of times these moments they can either flourish and turn into moments of change, or they can lead to reactionary, regressive, totalitarian politics as well. So I think we have to be really mindful and vigilant of that happening, and keep that vigilance side by side with a hope and a will for change.
I'm really glad you took my metaphor and ran with it so well there. Thank you so much. Uh, yeah, I just think it's interesting because, like, even as part of the project here, we've been looking at it. Like, we one of the aspects is looking at the kind of big ideas that are around work that kind of didn't get much kind of attention before, like a 4 day working week, which I
Mm-hmm.
know some parts of Europe are looking at, and like a universal basic income.
Yep.
like Ireland is looking at trialing that in certain sectors. Like I feel like it is a time to maybe look at these things that maybe might not have got attention before. But like, do you get a sense like from people you're speaking to, like when they're looking at like how they might work in the future, are they angry? Are they optimistic? Are they feeling like things will change for them for the better, or like what's the kind of sense that you're getting from people?
I think people feel empowered in this moment to try to change the way that work works. And so some of that is that we are in this real moment of transition as we prepare to go back into the office in months' time, or as people start to try to figure out what the future of that will look like. It does feel like, oh, well, we can change the parameters. Like they are flexible in this moment. And maybe within my company, I can try to voice some of those hopes and some of those ideas. And maybe too, the company is listening. And that extends, I think, not just to flexible work arrangements, but also things like diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace and trying to change how that works. Like one of the things about remote work is that it makes it easier to do DEI work, right? It makes it easier to recruit and maintain employees who are disabled, mothers, people of different races in different locations and different caregiving scenarios. And so hopefully companies that are serious about actually doing that diversity, equity, inclusion work are also serious about cultivating flexible and remote work options as well.
That's actually a really positive note to end on. You've covered all my questions. You might have noticed on the video that we've been through all four seasons of Ireland in one day. Like when we came on the call first, it was like lashing rain, it was hailstones, and the sun has come out now, and it's now on my face, and now it's kind of going away again. But
Amazing.
yeah, listen, Anne Helen Petersen, thank you so much for joining us today. We really really appreciate it, and thanks so much for your insights. We'll be following you on Substack and following your updates. Thanks so much.
It was my pleasure.